If your players feel powerful, your horror is already dying. Most tabletop role-playing games are built around escalation. Characters gain levels. They gain abilities. They gain the tools that make the world more predictable. The threats grow larger, but so do the players' capabilities. And that structure works extremely well for heroic fantasy. But horror operates on a very different foundation. Horror does not escalate. Horror erodes. It erodes certainty. It erodes control. It erodes the belief that things will resolve cleanly. And when a system consistently pushes towards empowerment, that erosion becomes difficult to sustain. When people talk about power fantasy, they often imagine a very specific type of character. But power fantasy is not really about a character's personality. It's about trajectory. In most tabletop campaigns, the trajectory is upward. Characters begin vulnerable. Over time, they gain resources, resiliency, and authority. Eventually, the world becomes manageable. Threats can be studied, confronted, and defeated. Now, this arc is deeply satisfying, but it introduces a structural conflict when horror is the goal, because horror depends on instability. I once ran a campaign where the players reached mid-level fairly quickly. Their abilities were impressive, and the group was really enjoying the sense of progression. But something subtly started to change. Situations that I had devised to challenge the players quickly became nothing more than solvable problems, and the tone of the table shifted without anyone intending it. Power fantasy escalates. Characters become stronger. Their options expand. Their survivability improves greatly over time. Horror depends on the opposite condition. Horror depends on erosion. It erodes certainty. It erodes control. And it erodes the belief that the situation will resolve itself safely. When a system consistently escalates power, that erosion becomes extremely difficult to sustain. Sustained horror requires a very specific emotional condition. It requires uncertainty, limited control, and psychological fragility. When players feel exposed to the unknown, their decisions carry weight. They move cautiously. They question preconceived assumptions, and they hesitate before acting. But when players feel mechanically secure, their mindset changes. The question stops being, what is happening? And it becomes, how do we overcome this? And that shift transforms fear into problem solving. In another game I ran, the players encountered something in a fantasy setting that they didn't expect. I had all kinds of different ideas tossed in to really throw them off their game right from the start. At first, they were very cautious. They spoke quietly and moved carefully through the environment, fearing what they would discover next. But over time, once they realized they possessed the tools to understand and defeat this new, unexpected threat, the atmosphere changed almost instantly. Their actions went from being cautious to being bold. Sustained horror requires uncertainty. Players need to feel that their control is limited, that their information is incomplete, and that their stability may disappear unexpectedly. But when players believe they can defeat the threat eventually, fear becomes tactical. They start calculating abilities and positioning instead of questioning the situation itself. And once fear becomes tactical, dread cannot persist. Many tabletop systems unintentionally reinforce safety. Leveling systems increase survivability. Balanced encounters imply that the threats are meant to be overcome. Magic provides reliable solutions to unknown problems. Each of these design choices makes sense for heroic play. But together, they teach players something about the world. They teach that the situation is manageable. Once that belief settles in, sustained dread becomes very difficult to maintain. I've also seen this happen simply through encounter balance. Players learn over time that GMs don't really want to kill off their PCs. They learn that GMs balance encounters so they're difficult, but ultimately survivable. Even when the situation looks dangerous, experience teaches them that the system is designed to keep them alive. And once that expectation settles in, fear becomes temporary. You see, most tabletop systems quietly reinforce safety. Leveling increases resilience. Balanced encounters imply survivability. And magic provides answers to almost any question. Over time, players learn that the world is manageable. Horror teaches the opposite lesson. Horror teaches instability. It teaches that clarity may disappear, that allies may fail, and that the situation may not resolve itself cleanly. When empowerment becomes the dominant trajectory, sustained dread becomes extremely difficult. Horror does not require removing player agency, but it does require altering expectations. Instead of promising increasing mastery over the world, horror allows their control to narrow, their information to become uncertain, and their success to be incomplete. Consequences will linger longer than players expect. The goal is not to defeat players. The goal is to make the world feel less predictable, because dread lives in that instability. Horror in tabletop games is not primarily about monsters. It's about erosion. It's about the slow realization that control may be more fragile than it first appeared. Power fantasy pushes in the opposite direction. It builds certainty, it builds capabilities, and it builds confidence. And confidence is the quiet enemy of dread. If you want sustained horror at your table, the question is not how powerful the threat is. The question is much simpler. How safe do your players feel? And what happens when that safety begins to falter?